Hi, thanks everybody. I'm Benjamin Mitchell. As I said, I'm an independent consultant. I run my own company and I work through convoluted associate consultant models. But my main work is helping teams, especially in difficult situations. My history that I'm going to tell you about tonight while introducing these topics has mainly been with financial services companies in London, both offshore and remote working as well. So I wanted to sort of introduce Kanban by kind of doing a bit of a Kanban. So I've got here a list, a very simple Kanban. I've got a sort of a backlog or to-do list, as it's more commonly known. And these are the topics I hope to get, well, I could get through. These are the topics I have slides to talk about. Then I just want to check our time constraints. We've got beer at 8 o'clock. That's a key constraint. Train at 9 p.m. So what we're going to do is try and get through as many of these as you think are meaningful. And I want it to be as much as, the purpose for me speaking tonight is for you to get value. So I just wanted to start by just asking briefly, just take a minute or two, are there any sort of key questions or issues that you're curious about or challenges that you've got about Kanban that you'd like me to answer in this hour? Yep.
What is Kanban?
Okay, what is Kanban? Okay, that's a good one. That's a very good one. I'm hoping to answer that one, right? Okay, but if I don't, if you're still puzzled at the end, let me know. Yep.
Are you still doing Kanban if you're not measuring things?
Are you still doing Kanban if you're not measuring things? Okay, good. Yep, let's keep.
Where do you come from?
Where do I come from? I come from Adelaide in South Australia. But I've been here 11 years, so, you know, have I not integrated? Have I not integrated? I've got a mongrel accent. No one in Australia thinks I'm from there, and no one here goes, what's that voice, mate? Okay, anything else? Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. If I don't answer that, come back before the end. I'll check, okay? All right, so let's go through it. So first of all, what I wanted to do was do an introduction to Scrum. How many people know Scrum? Let's show of hands. Or actually, the other way is more interesting. Who doesn't know Scrum? Okay, and who doesn't know Kanban? Okay, so people are familiar with Scrum, but not so much with Kanban. So let's go through it. So this is the team that I ran at an investment bank back in 2008. And we started doing Scrum, and during this time we transitioned to Kanban. So I want to tell you some of those war stories. What's funny about this is, you may not know this, but this is the fire escape in the investment bank. Because someone had told me that the CTO hated Agile after a major consultancy had been through and hadn't gone very successfully. So I decided that I wanted to do Agile, but I didn't want to talk to the CTO, who I'd been told hated it. So I sneakily and deceptively took the team out to the fire escape every day at 4:45, thinking that this was invisible. Yeah, question? The consultancy, it's a major consultancy with a thought-leading book author involved, but it doesn't really matter. The story was actually, because this is relevant, that the consultant had asked the head of the trading desk sort of business analysis team about a project that was long-running and had been unsuccessful, and they had a very large document describing the requirements. And the consultant, their strategy was to hold a meeting with the head of the desk, and they took the phone book-sized requirements and threw it in the rubbish bin and just said, just tell me what the system should do. And the guy that was across the desk, the head of the desk, I don't know if you've worked in an investment bank, but if you model a sort of medieval court with a king sort of serf relationship, it was like doing that to the king. And I've spoken to the consultant who did this afterwards, and he said, you've got to believe me, after he got over his shock, he really did find it effective. Now, I think that that approach isn't a very effective approach, but I'd also say that hiding in a fire escape is ineffective. And what I want to talk about is not only the Kanban, but how to talk about this stuff in a way that's likely to be more successful. Because in the end, it turned out the CTO loved this and wanted to do more of it. But I didn't have that chat until I'd resigned. So we were going with Scrum. So very simple. Scrum's nice. Scrum, there's a product backlog. You choose a period of time, 2 to 4 weeks, to do a sprint. You choose what comes off the product backlog into the sprint backlog. Every day you have a daily stand-up or Scrum meeting. Do that every day. You do the 2 to 4 weeks work, and then at the end you're meant to do a potentially shippable product and have a review with the stakeholders. So it's very nice. As I said to someone today, the nice thing about Scrum is it's pretty simple. It's very hard to do. And it's kind of got this trick to it. If it doesn't work, it will just show you the organizational dysfunction that stops it from working. It doesn't say a lot about how to fix it. Therein, I think, is one of the curious challenges. So we were doing Scrum to go live on this site. I mainly introduced it because I wanted to, and also that another consultancy had been in, and they were building it what they called iteratively, but it turned out they did incremental stuff every month for 3 months. It wasn't iterative at all. And it was seen as a disaster, and I thought, I need to get this project back on track. The only way to do that is to show evidence of producing. So we went for 1-week release cycles. And that all went very well. But I want to show you the result of that. And this graph shows the number of stories that we did across sort of 2007 to 2010. And I just want to see if anyone has a guess about when we went live. So what we were doing, we were doing Scrum, and I see this over and over. We were doing Scrum, and we did story points, and we did commitments, and we did targeted how many we had. And we were doing about sort of probably about 8-ish a week. And then we got up to 90 points of work in the go live sprint, and most of that was bugs in purple. So what we sort of found was that we built many things we didn't need to. We built things that we didn't understand. The permission system didn't play with everything else. And it went kind of crazy, as you can see. So we stopped a lot of the meetings around Scrum. We stopped doing the planning meeting. It was fairly clear when you've got 90 bugs, there's a fairly clear backlog of stuff that you get to work on. It's pretty obvious which ones are the most painful. So we just started working the most effective ones and continuing to release as often as possible. And that ended up making us wonder, maybe some of the things we're getting in Scrum, because it was very hard work on a project management level, because all the meetings, like the planning meetings, well, at the end of the sprint, there's the release, there's the retrospective, there's the review, and then there's the planning meeting. And out of 2 weeks, that was all really bunched up, and it used to feel like a wave that hit us and then went back, and we had a bit of a relax for a week, and then came through. And so we didn't need to do that because we had to go live. And so we started thinking about different ways of doing it. And the first thing we did was make things visible. And this came about because I had a very naive understanding of Scrum. Scrum talks about being self-organized. And so I thought, well, self-organizing means you get to choose what you want to work on. So we'd have a planning meeting, and the product owner would kind of lay out the cards. And then I'd say to the team, you're self-organizing. What do you want to work on? And what would happen was one guy in particular used to say, well, I'll work on that, and I'll work on that. And that's very interesting. I'll work on that. And he used to take like 3 or 4 things and sign himself up for them. The struggle was he never delivered on them. And we didn't have any way of tracking it. And during the sprint, he'd be going, yeah, going well, still hoping to get it done, going well. And then it would get to 2 days before the release, he goes, yeah, didn't get that done. and meanwhile, someone else who signed up for a smaller amount said, well, I've been kind of wasting time. I could have picked some of that up. So the first thing we tried to do was to make things visible, and we stopped the assignment at the planning meeting. People were allowed to choose more, people were allowed to sort of sign up for work they wanted to do, but they needed to just pull the next thing. They couldn't store one in reserve. And that was very helpful, and it really helped us. Now, this is sort of us doing a sort of a Scrum, but without all the planning events. We did stuff more on demand. So when we were about to start new work, we had a chat about what was next, and we had an input queue. And as I say, one of the key things was visibility. And so I just wanted to, one of the theories of Kanban is that you should start by making work visible because that helps people gain insight. And I just want to check as an experiment. Let's see what you see. So yeah, ask me any questions you want. And I just want to see if anyone sort of has any observations based on what they're seeing here, if they'd be willing to share it. What do people see? Loads of stuff for testing. Yeah, this is good. I actually took this photo to the Extreme Tuesday group that meets in London, which you're all welcome to. It's near Liverpool Street, so you can shoot on the train back here. Afterwards, every Tuesday in a pub, a bunch of people get together. I showed them this, and this was great. This was the day before release. And so it was like the lottery. I came into work and I just got no idea what might be released. And I predict a lot of stuff will be released that will not be finished testing. And we talked to the tester, how did you feel? And she said, I feel like I've been hit by a rock. So yep, there's lots of stuff in test. Any other observations? The guy in the green hat's not doing much. Yes, that's true. And then curiously, like we've swim laned by people. And this is because I wanted everyone to sort of choose what they wanted to do. And they were very keen on working individually. But like someone pointed out, what's really interesting is this guy here, he's got something in every column. And I said to him the next day, why have you got something in every column? He goes, I want to look busy. And he did. So this is a lesson to me. You've got to be careful what you measure. We're implicitly showing a value system in the way we'd set this work up that said, I want to know how you're doing. Whereas what the sort of the lean idea is, who cares what you're doing? How are we doing getting the work done? Okay, so it's a different sort of mindset that comes through. Anything else that people see?
So there's no kind of TDD underpinnings or any of this stuff, and that's why you've got all those things in the test column.
Well, that's interesting. What do you see that leads you to that view? You're thinking if there was TDD, you wouldn't see the queue?
Well, yeah, I'd see less in the ready for testing.
Your tester is an island up there.
Yes. Yeah, the tester is at the head of the column. That's certainly true. Yeah.
I think it's a very uneven distribution of work.
Yes, yeah. Yes, and so you can see that physically there's far more cards in that column than anything else. It wasn't TDD. I was trying to bring that in a mindset by saying before you start, we should sort of think about what it should do. And you see it evolve a bit, but it took a while. And we got there in 2 years, but not at this point.
Do you find that just using I don't know what we call this, a Kanban story or whatever you want to call it, with sticky tabs, do you find that the most effective way of communicating to people what's going on and where bottlenecks might be, rather than using some fancy tool?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I think there's a lot more information in a physical tool than an online tool. Online tools are fine, but I wouldn't use them as a preference. I mean, some fascinating stuff here, like the ones that were printed. I love this. I used to print them. It was back when I didn't have enough time to do other important things. I used to print them, but the ones that aren't printed were introduced during the sprint. So you can see immediately 50% of the work wasn't in there at the start of the sprint, so within 10 days. We were so desperate not to look like a failure that we wanted to respond to whatever was urgent. And our understanding about what was urgent was so low in that environment that it was better to pick stuff up and start it than to have a fight about waiting 2 weeks. Because we had a product owner that was going around the building going, it's a complete failure. I wipe my hands of this. He had an accent, but I wipe my hands of this and I'm going to blame. His phrase to me when I started was, I won't blame you yet. You're new, I won't blame you yet. I'm like, I can't wait to get on board. When the blame starts, that'll be brilliant. It'll be like we're a team. Sorry, there was one more up there. That is an assumption and it is false. Yeah. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, there's no value delivered.
Yes, yes. The night before the release, there is nothing ready for release. Yeah, yeah.
Are those two guys at the bottom, the managers?
Oh, they're fantastic. Yeah, good point. No, they're the support crew. Now, one thing's interesting, they're on the board, but you can't see it because it's very small, but the little support guy's drawn himself horrified. I mean, you may see why, right? You know, we've got a bunch of stuff in test that hasn't been done. So this was sort of pre-Kanban. It was just visualizing stuff. And there's some other stuff I love that we've got 2 queues because the product owner couldn't put it in one. He'd go, these two are so similar. You go, no, put them in one. He's like, well, I put them side by side. And you're like, no, put them in one. So you can see like the relationship there wasn't very good. We were trying to get analysis on the board, but not doing very well. Some stuff we'd started failed, so we put it in the waste bin. And the support guys were on here, but we didn't really talk to them very much. Because in all honesty, in the investment bank, they're not paid very much. It's kind of frightening to interact with them. The developers don't want to talk about it. And in fact, a lot of teams don't even have a support crew that they talk to. That's another group. So what was happening here was clearly we got some visualization, we got some feedback. I think there's some pretty good feedback from the room. I went away licking my wounds from the information that was raised. Can you go on?
Sorry, when you say support group, do you mean those are the people who will be answering questions about the software, or in what way are they supporting?
The support in their job was to onboard new users, respond to inquiries, do system checks in the morning, all that kind of, actually make sure it ran and continued to run. Yep. So I went away, and many of those things were obvious, and I started being really interested in moving away from Scrum because Scrum hadn't actually sort of helped us with any of this. You know, I don't think Scrum in its sort of simple constraints says anything. There are practices like extreme programming and unit testing and TDD that might have, and we were varying on that. We inherited a lot of that from the consultancy that started. But what started to get me interesting was that it was clearly sort of unworkable, and there were things going wrong with it. And at that time, there were a lot of people talking about Kanban. So let me just intro Kanban. Kanban comes from Toyota, and it literally in Japanese means visual card. And the problem they were trying to solve is, if you're trying to build a car and you've got the chassis and you need to put 4 wheels on it, how do you make sure that you have 4 wheels when you need them? And one way of doing it is to try and predict how many wheels you need and make them and put them in a big pile of inventory so you can always have wheels available. What they found was they visited America in the 50s, and they found it really interesting that in the supermarket, they didn't have them, but in the supermarket, they found that thing where, you know, you pull off the shelf. I've only seen it in Australia, sort of at the back of the bubble gum rack near the cash register. There'd be, if you've got here, please order more, little card. That is a Kanban. So that is a visual signal. So it sort of says, when you get to this point, reorder more, and then you take that Kanban literally to the storeroom, and the storeroom would pull more. And the idea at Toyota was, if you only made exactly the number of tires you needed exactly when you needed them, you'd always have tires available. And so what they did to make sure that happened was they used a Kanban card to go and request the sort of tire group to prepare the tires. I'm sort of simplifying the example here, but it was essentially a card that would go to the previous group in the workflow and say, please make X and deliver it. And you weren't allowed to make anything if you didn't have a card to say that you're allowed to do that. So this is kind of, I mean, this doesn't do this. At the moment, there's no limits. But the idea is you don't do work until the downstream step is able to handle it. And you can see here that we had just no idea. We just kept throwing stuff into test over and over again. And I see this pattern very commonly when I work with clients. So a Kanban card is a visual signal, and it's kind of the permission to do work. And by limiting the number of them, you can limit the amount of work that the system does and make sure that everything you need is available just when you need it. What's interesting here in the software world is that we'll get to, by limiting the number of things that can go into test, you stop things being thrown over and doing what we have here. We've got a big pile up of work that might contain bugs or not get done or things like that. So just the Kanban is the visual card. With a capital K, it's called the Kanban method. And you may have, a guy called David Anderson, a Scottish guy in America now, has sort of popularized this with his book. And he has 5 sort of core properties. The first is to visualize the workflow, which we've seen. The second one is to limit the amount of work being done. The third one is to make sure that things flow, so that you don't sort of throw things over or throw them into a big pile. You actually flow them the whole way along. So the idea is to pretend you're a piece of work in the system and think what needs to happen to you to get done and what stops you from ever being worked on. You know, it's sort of an interesting idea. Imagine you're a card on the board. What does your life look like? And on our board, it looked like sort of a lot of waiting, a little bit of typing, a lot of waiting, a little bit of clicking, and then I released after more waiting. And the idea is that if you can get things to flow without stopping, you can get things done faster, get greater feedback. The feedback means you get better quality, you're able to release stuff better, and get more work done. Fourth one is make policies explicit. So if you do have a working practice, like what it means for dev to finish, like we didn't really, at that stage on that board, dev being finished just meant devs thought it was okay. The rigor was to ask yourself, do I feel done? And if you said yes to yourself, then you moved it on to test and just threw it in the pile. Obviously, that's a pretty lame test of logic. So making policies explicit is about being clear about what it means when dev's finished and test can start. What do you mean? And then finally, it's all sort of wrapped up in a sort of a learning loop to try and sort of keep working over these things using other models like the scientific method to try and improve. So the key thing that I want to stress is this idea of pulling. So the idea is when you signal back upstream, you send a card saying, please, do me some more development, that you're essentially pulling. And it starts with a customer. The whole problem that Toyota was trying to solve was how do we manufacture cars at the rate of demand? No more, no less. Just build a car that's going to be bought, no more, no less. So what happens is that signal, the Kanban signal, is in fact a pull. So the customer says, I would like to buy a car. So that starts the whole process off, and then you work back. But in software, it's basically this. Don't build features that no one needs yet. Don't test more code than you can deploy. Don't write more code than you can test. And don't write more specs than you can code. So this whole idea of just doing what you need at the time you need it, no more, no less. So to illustrate some of the exit criteria, we were talking about TDD. People were saying that didn't work. So we redid the board after I had that conversation when I showed people that photo. And we introduced a design step. And the intention was to get towards the capability of TDD, but at the rate that we could manage it. So it just wasn't possible to do straight off. But we wanted to bring that thinking in. So we identified sort of explicit exit criteria. What does it mean if you've picked up work from ready for development, and you're about to take it into a design step. To finish design, what does it mean? And this is what the team came up with. And I love this idea. You ask the team, what does it mean for work to move to the next step? What are we going to hold ourselves to? What standard? And the idea here was that you talk with someone else. You wrote a JIRA in the electronic tracking system. Make sure you had acceptance tests and they were reviewed. You wrote how to test it manually if it wasn't possible to do it automated. And the key thing that it took ages for us to develop because we got too intense. Yep.
Sorry, you were saying talking back to someone else about agreeing that. Did you sort of switch to go into a paired programming approach then?
That was an option. I loved paired programming, and I still do. I find a lot of teams choose not to do it or to do only a little bit of it. So I was a passionate advocate for pairing, and you could pair if you wanted. If you didn't, you had to make sure that someone else other than you knew what you were doing, how you test what you were doing, and what was involved. Yeah, agreed. And I've got another board that shows code review, and the rule is if you pair, you don't code review. If you don't pair, you have to code review. Yeah, okay.
These are your definitions of done.
I guess, yeah, that's another one. What surprised me was how long it took us to realize you need to talk. and so then we started running this at stand-up, and we shared who ran the stand-up. But one of the questions was people would say, oh, I'm starting development on that. And so people would say, have you talked to the tester? Have you talked to the BA? And people would say no. And they're like, well, that doesn't play. Back.
But that's the big danger in the sense of automated TED. Definition of done can be the test pass.
Yeah.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't actually.
I know.
The features actually give it
We found a cracker.
a certain number of test passes.
We found a cracker. We got a handover from another group, and the tests were running, and then we did an upgrade, and they failed. And we looked at the test. We should have looked at the test, right? That was bad. But we looked at the test, and the test was validating that if, like this is foreign exchange, that a valid price was not a number, NaN in JavaScript. And then it had a to-do next to it, fix this later. And it's no surprise that the QA group were tracked on how many tests they wrote. And it turned out they wrote that test before the software worked, and they wanted to make the test pass so they could go on and write more tests.
That's the reason I say that the emphasis is sometimes just on writing tests that pass,
Yes.
not on delivering business features.
Yes. Yep, agreed, absolutely. So the other thing, you also notice here we have a WIP limit. So we sort of said only 7 things can be ready for development, no more. So you could move things out, but you couldn't put more than that in there. The idea of sort of limiting the number of things you're working on at any one time is sort of based on this idea that the more multitasking we do, the worse we do. And often before you visualize things, you know, like in that team I described, the guy was working on 3 things at once, although none of them really. And there's one theory that sort of says the more things you try and do simultaneously, the more switching time that you'll have to use, and so the less productive you'll be. There's some evidence for this. I don't think it plays as much as people say it does. But we've definitely found it useful to focus on not starting new work until we finish old work and to push to unblock stuff. Well, that's the thing. So what we said to him was, we would like to do what you find most important, and you get to tell us what's most important, and we're not going to tell you can't tell us to change. If you tell us to change and we've started the work, we'll put it in the waste bin so that you understand the consequence of your decision. But our job here is for you to get the value that you want out of the team. So you're allowed to change it. It was actually really nice because we said we don't need 2 weeks worth of stuff ready at the start. We just need enough for us to start on. So as long as we've got 7 things there, we don't need to do more than that. And he quite liked that because he found the planning meetings not so productive. So he liked it, and he liked the flexibility. And at the start, we really leant over and sort of said, you get to change whatever you like, but we're going to do it, visualize it, and track the impact. And that helped, because it's after a while, when he saw we were delivering, he stopped doing that. It wasn't so needed. Does that help in terms of the question? Okay. So this is where we got to, and I'm running a bit long, so I'm going to skip on again. This is where we ended up sort of 2 years later. So I don't know, any quick observations? Running very long. Yeah. Yep, ready for release is full, yep.
So kind of evolution of the board, you've got a lot of columns in there.
Yep.
So going from nothing to that is an evolution.
Yeah, exactly. So it took us, the first 6 months were on the other board. This was another 6 months. Someone asked about, doing physical boards. I love this because it was just cut and pasted together. And you can see you actually can't see some things. There's some swim lanes here, but they're in pencil because we weren't sure about the idea yet. Whereas here we were quite confident about it.
The resources moving around.
Yep, the resources. What are you seeing that says that?
Well, the people are all over the place. There are different roles.
Yep, yeah, exactly. We've got a couple of people working on testing. That's our business analyst, so he's joined the board. He wasn't there before. We're no longer swim laning by people. It didn't care what you did. Actually, that was the other thing. In stand-up, we stopped doing those 3 annoying questions of Scrum. Were you busy yesterday? Are you promising to be busy today? And did nothing block you? Because that's what the 3 Scrum questions are sort of, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What's blocking you? And it just became a murmuring kind of, I'm busy and not very productive. So we just stopped asking that. And we started doing this lean idea of pull from this end. So what we started the stand-up by asking the support guys to talk. And we said, actually, what we really want to know, are there any errors in production? And the guy said, what do you mean? And we're like, are there any errors? Any errors in the logs? He's like, you're shitting me, right? Actually, he would have said that if he was Australian. I've added that for effect, right? Yeah, he wasn't Australian, but if he was, that's what he would have said. He said, there are 1,700 errors every day. And we're like, there are 1,700 errors! And we go, wait, how come you didn't tell us? And he goes, there's always been 1,700 errors every day. I thought that's how you wanted it to be. And so to slow things down, we walked the board from right to left, and we started by making him read every error. Pretty quickly we themed them because they were pretty dull. We themed them, and it took us about 4 or 5 months to get rid of many, like the worst of them. But we worked through that list. So he would always start because we wanted to get this pull thing. What are the customers doing? Any action? Any new customers? Any trading differences? Was the site down? And we'd spend the time on that, and then we'd sort of say, right, this stuff in acceptance testing, what needs to happen for that to be ready for integration testing? And so on, back across the board. And the question was about the work, not about the people. I just said, I'm going to assume you guys are busy. I don't want to waste my time hearing that you guys are busy. I do want to know what's stopping the work from moving. And I want to be very clear that we want the pull to come from this side of the board, not a push to come from this side of the board. Some other things, we had external teams that we relied on. They had a different workflow from us, but we put them on the board and gave them different headings, fairly simple, to be scoped, scheduled, underway, validated, and then ready for drop. Here you can see we're actually ready ahead of time for the fortnightly release. This is the next fortnight's release ready, even though we haven't been able to release that one yet. So we're ahead of time. Yeah, the feature underway, so the green things were sort of overarching features that the steering committee cared about, and then underneath, and the top one is bugs and defects. The top one is bugs and defects. Then we limited 3 features underway at any one time in order to get them done quicker, and they'd have tasks that were split out, and we'd push them across. The yellow ones were kind of user-facing, the orange ones were technically like team-focused tasks. Yeah.
So did you define kind of transition rules, if you like, how you move from one column to the next?
Yep, so all of them have exit criteria like I showed. And now let's be clear, some of them were better than others. We were very good about not allowing dev to start before you talked. We were less good about some of the others. And it takes time to get people good at that sort of stuff. So that's one thing I'd say. One of my messages, working with people is hard. They do change. They take a while to change. So I have to practice a lot low frustration tolerance, just expecting that this took 2 years to get to this point. And it was super well oiled at this point. Yeah, anything else?
What are the horizontal rows?
The horizontal, these? You mean? So these are features. So this top one, the idea is that from the top down you get a priority. So we had bugs and defects that needed to be fixed that were small. And then if you couldn't work on any of them, you picked up the next feature. And if you couldn't work on any of them, you picked up that feature. So the major features that the sponsors cared about. Because they didn't care about the little tasks, much though we wish they would.
Do you still do it in the same way with the Post-it notes? Or are you using the same principle but on Trello or something?
Yeah, I'm using Trello, yes. Yes, so we've got a team in another country, and they do their own thing a bit. And I love the boards, the physical boards, so we've definitely got a wall, but everything's on Trello as well. Everything here was on Jira as well.
Okay, yeah, because I did something similar to it. Then I tried it in Google Docs, which just is horrible. It kind of jumps around a lot. But the main thing is I wanted some way to look back, so we can feel like, oh, what happened with that, and when did we implement it?
Yep.
At least there's a way to record it, whereas with bits of paper, I find you just find, putting Post-its and filing cabinets, and you just
Yep.
this could get really messy when you're
That's
trying
more
to
PM things,
find it.
those things, being able to look respectively back and look at over And that's where you need
Sorry.
automation, whereas the immediacy of the current iteration of going on is a great one.
Yeah, no, so I was just more interested to know if you're still using
The walls.
the wall.
I love the walls, actually. I've got a place now where I can actually use walls, and I'll show you some of the damage we've wrought. But the walls is...
So you like it colourful and you find that people find it more urgent if they're looking at it all the time.
Yeah, and I just love, now I look across the room and I just see people at the board. Oh, that was so fun. Another team felt that, in the same organization, felt that that cards didn't have enough room to write on, so they used Jira, and the next day they had to stand up around a monitor, and the next day they printed Jira, and then the next day they went back to the wall again. It was hilarious. It was hilarious. I mean, as soon as you involve a computer monitor in a stand-up, oh man, it sucks all the energy. Whereas physically at the board really matters.
Do you have a meeting every day around?
Yes, absolutely. I hold no meetings other than a retrospective, the planning if we need it on demand, and the stand-up. But the stand-up religiously, every day. Yeah.
Beginning or the end?
Well, I've done both, right? It depends. There's a great blog by Jason Yip about the advantages and disadvantages of both. I like the end of the day because everyone's there. Because at 9:30, some people can't make it in London. Anyway, I'm going to... Sorry? Yeah. Cool. All right, so let me crack on. So one of the things with this pull mindset is you need to sort of have a different approach. It's unbelievably strong in people, the urge to start new work. And if something blocks them, they just start new work. And one of the challenges is getting people out of that mindset. So we're quite explicit that when you've finished your work, can you help progress anything that's underway? Go work on that. If you don't have the right skills, find a bottleneck somewhere else and go and help do that work. So you might do some testing or at least go and talk to the testers and see if you can help. If you don't have the right skills, pull in work from the queue if you can, if the limits aren't breached. If you can't start anything, then try and do some work preparing for future work so that would be quick. And then if there's no actual explicit work, think about things in general you could do that don't create more work for others in the team. So you might sort of come up with an automation strategy, or you might improve the way you do requirements, those things. So one of the things, the other thing with Kanban, so it's this visual card, but this method sort of says, focus on flow and limiting the amount in progress. One of the things you might find is that if you're a real theoretical type, you could actually say that Scrum fits into this. The thing with Scrum is it has these special meetings, the planning, the review, the retrospective, the release, and it does them on a time boundary. So one of the ideas was that we went to when we went live was, why do we need all of these things to happen on the same sort of calendar basis? Why don't we do retrospectives on a calendar basis, like every 4 weeks, but do planning every 2 weeks, and then release every week, for instance? We may not need to keep planning all the time. Or your other option is to become event-based. So you say some things are on a calendar, like retrospectives, but planning, just when we have the ability to start a new feature, do we then go and do the conversation about it? Doing it earlier is a sort of a waste, because there may be changes between talking about it and starting it. And we did that all the time. We had a specification document that I worked out cost £40,000 for a feature that we never ended up building. And the thing is, like, at least if you're making tires in a factory, you could sell the tires on eBay. Nobody wanted to pay for a £40,000 spec for a feature in our system that didn't get built. But we were so certain it was going to be built, and it was certain, and it turned out not to be. So the whole time we were aggressively sort of reducing the effort that we put in so that we put in the right effort closer to the time. And then the final thing is you can release on demand. I've never gone for that release on demand, but I know some websites that do continuous release, which I think is the bomb, if you can manage it. If you can continuously release to a small number of servers, find out if it worked or not, and automatically roll it back, you've reached nirvana in terms of deployment, in my mind. I've not yet been able to work in that environment. So for us, for all the projects I've run in the last 5 years, it's always been every fortnight as a metronome, and everything else comes back off that. So we learned many, many useful things. We learned that it's better to start finishing stuff rather than starting new stuff. We learned that we could change the cadence, the timing of the planning, the review, and the release. We worked that not all work has the same need for timeliness. So a lot of the Scrum stuff is sort of estimate everything and predict everything. And that's just, it wasn't important all the time. Some things it was critical for, other things didn't matter. Like if you could get it done in the next 6 weeks, that'd be great, but it doesn't matter. Some things had to be done next week. And so we were sort of splitting out, thinking differently about when meetings need to happen and what the work needs in terms of timeliness. And also just making incremental improvements, so they're playing around with the board. That's the major reason I like practical boards, is that like if we change our process now, we just rip masking tape off a wall. Whereas, I don't know if anyone's used Jira. If you need to change the workflow in that, it's like a request to a guy that lives in a room that only has pizza that goes under the door and it goes into a queue. And you better get that right, because if you get that wrong, that's going to be 2 weeks' time turnaround. That's so much slower than just ripping masking tape off a wall. OK, so that was going to take 15 minutes and took 40, which is good. I'm showing here that we've got lots of...
Can I ask you something about timeliness?
Yes. Yeah. I'll do the jokes, dude. I'll do the jokes.
No, one of the big issues that we found in following kind of more traditional Scrum, sprint planning, execution stuff is dependencies between tasks which don't all fit into the same Scrum, but need to be done in a particular order.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated by the couple of other models that you just showed there, event-driven and the other one. There's a potential way of solving that issue.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how. But I'd be happy to talk more about it in the pub.
When you do a sprint plan, you take from the backlog the highest priority stuff that
Yeah.
the customer wants to do in that 2-week period, and you do that.
Yeah.
But things overflow from one to the other.
Yes.
Sooner or later you get a sprint which is just doing the stuff you didn't do on the last one.
Yes.
By the way, there's some of the tasks that you needed to do 2 sprints ago because you wanted to pick up the other task, but you can't do that until this one's finished.
Yep.
So you've got kind of dependency management
Yep.
issue that you can't kind of deal with.
Yep.
And it doesn't fit very well into this very kind of rigid sprint planning
Yes.
execution structure. I'm just wondering whether those other 2 models help in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the pressure is right. Can you make it as small as possible so that you can get it done quickly? But sometimes the smallest thing you can do is not relevant or pulled by external people. So we had products that took 6 weeks. They just took 6 weeks. So we would strive to make the things small so that we could stop them and deliver value early, if at all possible. But if they ran over sprint boundaries, they ran over sprint boundaries. And then the conversation was, if you've got dependencies, you've got to spend a lot more time thinking about that, because there's no magic. You just need to know about it and think about it.
What's your take on how much to put in? Because certainly the people that are managing our sprint said, we always want to make them a challenge. A stretch is the way that they always put it. So they always put more than you can actually achieve in a sprint every time. So you always got stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. This question is good. It helps me practice low frustration tolerance. I wrote in my book today, my sort of journal, if you like, that one of the things that annoys me most is this mindset that says, in order for things to go faster around here, what we need is more committed typing. A mate of mine said that the model in the investment bank was, if the developers could type at the rate of a fat man drumming, that would be brilliant, because then the managers, if they needed more work, could just yell for that guy to type faster. The thing for me is the commitment. I think it's interesting to know whether the thing that stops the work from happening is psychological commitment or not, or whether it's a bunch of other stuff. And I'll shoot through, actually, because I've got some good stuff on that. Quickly, the difference between a pull versus push mindset. This takes a long time to learn. This is us going live on this project in March. This is the left-hand side of the board. We've got whip limits. You can see the masking tape, by the way. Literally, it's masking tape. You can see somewhere in here is the fire extinguisher, the emergency exit. Financial trading websites. So if you want to do like a financial product like a cap or a swap for interest rates, or you want to do a financial transaction, it's building websites for banks. 2 separate places, but both of them with that. Sadly, I wish if someone's here doing like socially significant work, we should talk later. No, I'm just... So what was happening here was we went live. We had another one of those spikes. This was a different project, but the same thing happened. When we went live, suddenly we discovered all this crap came out that we weren't prepared for. So we had it tightly limited, and we had like sheet pen. We had like the next 3 most important bugs, the next 5, the next 8, never going to fix. And I kept this visible because I thought it helped us make good decisions when new bugs came. Was it more important than one of these other things? But the team were depressed, they told me, and the management actually thought that I was depressed. I was slowing down the speed of typing because of the sheer number of cards. Which I can't be but sarcastic, because I just don't see the devs going, oh, I can't lift. There's too many cards on the wall that I'm not looking at.
Don't underestimate the buzz in a developer's mind of moving from one card from one column to the next.
Well, this is what was interesting. You see, when I come in, this is the mindset thing. I'm all about pull. How much have we got done? What's stopping the work from getting done? How do we get it done quicker? I like that thought. So I come in the morning and I look at the stuff that we've done in the last 10 days and I go, yeah. And then I look at the board and say, is anything queuing? No, there's no queues. Yes. So work is flowing. We're limiting it. It's getting across as quick as it can. If it blows out to the left here, I don't even think about it. So it was really curious. They did. And I said, why are you guys depressed? Because I'm not trying to depress. Actually, that was the thing. That was the thing I loved. I wasn't allowed to ask them if they were depressed because it was believed that, like children, they would become depressed more by thinking about depression. But I braved it. I thought they were adult enough to ask. And they said, well, the thing is, what we liked about Scrum was that we used to have a queue of stuff to do on the left. And when we come in the morning, we'd say, have we done that? And if there was nothing to the left of us and nothing in our column, good week, good week. Whereas now we're seeing a lot of stuff. And I just thought that was interesting because the mindset was still push. I do what I promise. I just shove it over the wall to test. And as long as test is handling it, well, actually, I don't really care. Because literally, they just didn't look. So I thought that was interesting. This is just to prove that my project isn't the only one with stuff in test. This is a group that I consulted with. What I loved here, and I see this so often, and the question is, what's your mindset? Why is development continuing when there's just a bottleneck? I mean, that's my claim, that's a bottleneck. There's a bottleneck in test. What does it say about what we think test is doing? And they were really like, well, we always need to be deving because if we're not typing, then we won't get stuff finished. And I'm like, why don't we go and look and see? And they said, no, we can't because we'll run out of work for tests and they'll run dry. So I had to, I don't have it. I had to resort to forks to prove it. In the end, we had to negotiate and we got half an hour. I said, could we just try 30 minutes where the developers sit with the testers and just see what they're doing? Because I was saying, look, the rate we're getting through this, if you spend 30 minutes, it's not going to make a difference. You won't run out of dev stuff. And it was amazing. They'd never spoken to each other. And this is in a company of only 30. They'd never spoken to each other, and then they found that the testers had the wrong spec, and they were using the wrong environment, and they had the wrong setup. So immediately it was beneficial, but it was just the challenge of sort of getting people to think about finishing the work and pulling across rather than just pushing from their column. Okay, so some measuring flow. This is, like I said, the key thing from a lean point of view is how do we get stuff done? So what's helping it flow, and what's hindering it? And the reason I introduced this with the recent team is we did code review, and I kept thinking that people were throwing the work over to do code review and then picking up new stuff. And they didn't. And literally a guy said to me, I don't see your problem, Benjamin. And I was like, well, that's important. If you don't see my problem, how can we have a discussion? So we instituted this idea where every column on the board has an initial, like D for dev, T for test, and X for finished. And every day at stand-up, after we finished talking about the work, we put which column it was in. The other thing you can see here is we've got a box here that shows the box is drawn when the work is ready for code review, and the initials of the people go in there. In this case, there's 2 initials, which is a signal that that was paired by those 2 guys. But what's so lovely about this is you get to study the flow of work. What happens to this work? Where did it spend its time on the board? You can then do things like a histogram. Yes, indeed, a histogram at work. I bet you never thought it. This is like 1 day through to 7+ days, so it showed us how big are our tasks. It let us ask questions like, why are some things taking a long time? What happens to them? And we worked out things. Actually, the test here was I said lots of things were stopping in code review, and out of this whole set, there was only 1 code review initial. So there wasn't any evidence for my position, which calmed me down, right? And it showed that I could be wrong. I was wrong. I'm not anymore, but anyway. Winning's not the point. Someone asked what the room looks like. This is where we do the stand-up each day. There's the histogram wall. There's our board left to right. We've got lots of interesting stuff on the left, like what's coming. You can then put all these cards together in histograms over the last 12 weeks, like I did, and then even better, bring data to your retrospective. Yes? Yes. Yes. Yeah, the last column here you can't tell it, but that's ready for drop, and when it's dropped to the external customer, and yeah, it's looking back. Yep. But the thing is, you get it during the day. There's one actually that we're calling the test-driven card that I forgot to photograph it yesterday when I was at the client. But it starts in finished, and then it went back to development, and it's just yo-yoed its way through. And that's a great thing to talk about at retrospectives. Why did we start this work, think it was done, and then spend another 9 days on it? And it also allows us, when work, we know the average is about 3 days. So once things get to 3 days, we sort of start asking, what's happening? Is there more than one task? Should we split it out? Think about making it smaller. And so we do that at stand-up every day. You bring the data to the retrospective. Retrospectives are really good. I think a lot of people just do them on opinion. It's very nice to have the actual cards there telling the story of what happened to them and looking for trends. Like we started to find that we were doing smaller things that we liked, and we thought that was the right direction. And you can graph it over time, and this is a stacked percentage. And this is really interesting. Like, on average, this is the average at the end here of the sprints are fortnightly, so there's 12 weeks work here, 3 months work. 60% of the time is spent with a card in dev. Then it waits for code review for gets done in code review for 12% of its life. Then, amazingly, it waits for nearly 15% of its life for test to be ready. And then it spends less than 10% of its time in test. But what's really interesting to me is the only value add time, I think, is the dev, the test, and maybe a little bit of code review. That tends to take about an hour. But nearly 50% of the time that the card spends, 50% extra of the time is just waiting, because someone's not ready. And so we're trying to drive that down. And you can see here that the code review is sort of blowing out in time, and also the waiting for tests. This one was particularly bad because the guy who specializes in tests for our team was away that sprint. But it's good data, and it shows trends over time for the team. And the key thing is, from a lean point of view, you want to increase the amount of time cards spend being actively worked on and reduce the queuing time. Sorry, didn't see. Yep. Loads. Yep. Do they maintain the cards? Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I said the physical wall is so beautiful. I see a couple of rows back from here, but people talk all the time. All the time. It's fantastic. Well, the tester now, you can see here, like, nothing is in test, and that's what it's been like for weeks. The tester is actually sort of working more up with the BA, which I think is the right thing to do ahead of time. And I reckon given another 6 months, we get to sort of specs, executable specs. That's what I've seen in the past, yeah.
Getting into test.
Yep.
Developer will say, yeah, I'm done.
Yep.
And then tester might, how's that process work? Do you have a ready for test column where, say, a deployment team will then take it dev and put it in test?
No, it's all automated deployment at the moment. Yeah. We started without the ready for test. We just had dev and test. I mean, this is the thing with Kanban. Each column can kind of have an in progress and then being operated on, like a queue and then doing. I tend not to illustrate that if I can avoid it, because I don't think things should queue, and that's my starting point. We did test, and then we found that test was full, but it wasn't actually being worked on because only one guy was there. So then we had to institute waiting for test to make the queue visible. And then we talked a lot about why we bottlenecked. Why do we keep sending dev work into test without waiting or helping test do better work? Yep.
Given the benefits of this system of permanent visibility,
Yep.
all methods always available to say work. What benefit do you get from the daily stand-up?
Oh, loads. The daily stand-up. I mean, the thing for me is it helps me understand what's going on. It lets us just sort of check. Actually, the main thing is the social check. Like here, you can see people will block cards, put a green thing on it, but the stand-up is where people say, well, why is that blocked? I see that it's blocked, and you've written a description and a date. That's good, but why is it blocked? What's stopping us from unblocking that work today? And there's a lot of sort of social checking that I find very valuable about explicitly saying what you're doing and what's happening to the work at the stand-up. Where are you going with this?
What do you need to know is, you can see there's a flow that is progressive.
Yeah.
What do you get from that sort of communication you wouldn't get any other time of the day?
Well, one thing is it lets everyone do it, and so there's incidental benefits. So people say, oh, I did something like that last week, or you should talk to Thomas because he knows how to test that better. And yet mainly the social check. It would be fine if humans were like robots and always did what they should, but we don't. And it's very useful because other people spot us acting inconsistently. I find the stand-up most valuable for that.
So your stand-up is a daily retrospective?
Yeah, kind of. And we collect information for it. Let me go on a bit. I'm going to skip this because it's esoteric. But let me just talk. So here, for example, this is great. We said we do, back to, like, following on my favorite topic, humans. My background, psychology. Humans are weird creatures. We said we wanted to do code review. We decided we had some problems. We weren't pairing. Code review would be a solution. The team loved it so much, they evangelized it to the rest of the company. They got up at the company meeting and said, we love code review. And yet, every day we kept finding this. There was no code review queue, and then we made a code review queue because so much stuff went in it. And then I was practicing some really low-level stuff where I'd say, I'm noticing 4 cards in code review. I'm just wondering, why have we got 4 cards in, who's working on them? And they're like, no one's working on them. I'm like, what? I said, the thing we're trying to get going here is a pass the baton thing, so the work flows constantly. You guys have just like thrown the code review stuff over the wall. Why are you doing that? And it was really interesting. It was because they were afraid to interrupt each other, because other people, quote, look busy. And so that's important. If you're frightened of interrupting someone, you're not going to interrupt them, and that's what happened with the queue. But just to wrap it up with humans, we saw this one day, we talked about it, we said we'd work on it, we saw it the next day at stand-up, it was still there. And so the stand-up is a point where we kind of go, oh, yesterday we talked about fixing it, and we said we'd do X and Y, and yet it's still there. So what happened? What happened? Why didn't it work the way we were thinking it worked? And what are we going to do today to make sure it goes? And I find if I didn't have stand-up, we wouldn't be able to have those kind of discussions and fix those kind of problems. Yep. Well, it's... Yes. Yes. Yeah, yes. It was very unfair. Yes, I mean, and I guess my bias is I want to know why we need the tester. Like, I like testers, and I've been a tester, I've run test teams. I think they're very valuable. We tend to use BAs for testers more and more on projects, so the BAs do the testing. The thing for me was that if we don't have a tester, then the rest of the team has to take responsibility, and I want that responsibility. The thing I keep saying is if you let the card go, you know it's good. If it comes back and you're surprised, that's interesting. That's a mistake. Well, that's a kind of an error. We shouldn't have that. We shouldn't need tests to find errors. We should know when we're done that it's done and done right. So in some ways, I kind of like the pressure. It's hard on the tester. It's very hard on the tester. But we tend to get there by going to help the system, if that makes sense. So setting it up so the tester's not doing things like running scripts or like set up or environments, things like that, automate all that. Does that answer your question, though? Do you want to come back? No? Okay.
Sorry, what does BA stand for?
Oh, business analysis. Yeah, business analyst. Okay, that's bottlenecks.
I'm not really convinced by that, what you just said about, you know, if an error comes back from test, that's a problem.
Well, I think it's, we'll go on. Tell me why you think so.
Well, you know, you're a psychology guy, so the psychology you want to try and breed into your dev community is that, you know, finding and fixing bugs or generating code where bugs are found is not a bad thing. Otherwise, you drive all that behavior underground and people won't, you know.
This is true. This is true. I think it's an error if we let work go and we didn't know that there was an error, and I think we should strive to correct that. I think if it does go and an error is found, that's useful feedback. And it's not that you're a damned terrible developer for all of time. It's like it's a curious puzzle. What if anything, led you to think it was high quality when you let it go, and now find out that you didn't? Because we want to know about that, though.
Sometimes, as a developer, you get kind of buzz at the fact that somebody's found a bug, and because you've got a very good testing regime, you know exactly how to find and fix that thing real fast.
Yeah, my thing is you don't want to produce it, right? That's the goal.
No, you're not doing it intentionally, but you know, we're not all perfect, right?
Agreed. And I think it's fair enough to sort of say, if we did find a bug, it's worth asking the question, how come the bug got there?
Yes,
what?
You can improve your testing regime and the way that you define tests and how you define functional boundaries and scope and all kinds of things, so that you get, the purpose is to drive that number down, but it'll never be zero.
Yes, and I still like 0 as a goal. Well, it depends, actually. If the economic costs are such, like some guys like Forward, they can do things like U-switch. They can push a piece of code out, notice they give it to a small number of clients, and notice key measures like sign-ups might differ. And if there's a difference, it ejects it like an automatic immune system. The cost of doing that is so low for them that it may not be worth the extra time to make sure it's perfect. It may be worth throwing it out. Yeah. 3 minutes. I'll just go through this. I wanted to sort of, I'm not a great evangelist for Kanban because I think it's complex. One of the problems that comes up is that it becomes like the iterative death march, that there's always a ticket to pull, like Oliver going back for more porridge. It's just over and over, and it gets a bit drudging. It can be hard work. So you've got to balance that by making the work purposeful, having celebrations when stuff is done, and also balancing the team's time. The idea of gold cards or time that the team can spend doing their own tasks, that's something that I've used quite a lot. I was just going to have a moan. This is the end-to-end time of development, where orange is development time, green is waiting for any customer to use it. We didn't go live until 200 days through the project. Then many of the things were used and priced. Only a few were traded. These are financial products. The red ones were never, ever used, and it just annoyed the crap out of me, if I'm honest. That's why I made it red. We built, half of the products we built, no one ever touched for anything, and yet we had to keep them there and regression test them and all the rest. That led me to think that it wasn't purposeful. There's a great study where they get 2 groups of people to build Lego models. You get $5 for the first model, then a decreasing amount by 50 cents each time. You can build as many as you want. The difference between the 2 groups are that one of them, when they finish the model gets taken outside. And the other group, the model gets pulled apart in front of them. So it's as if you see your own handiwork destroyed. And that's what they call the low purpose condition. And they found that even if you loved, like everyone in the low purpose condition stopped quickly, even if they loved Lego. That it didn't matter if you even loved Lego. If the work that you did didn't result in any outcome that you thought was significant, it was you stopped building. And that's how I felt in this situation. They asked me when the 28th product was coming through, and I became John McEnroe. I was like, you cannot be serious. So that they were building stuff without understanding or having customers.
So weren't you talking earlier about, kind of just in time?
Yes.
Highest priority thing that a customer has asked for.
Yes.
But the evidence is they're not being used.
Yes.
So what's the problem?
So you see, it's funny, you see, because I'm feeling negatively evaluated and attacked in the way that you say it. The purpose of this was to show them that, but the way I presented it resulted in the same impact on them, and so we didn't talk about it.
I'm not saying what's your problem, I'm saying there's a problem here.
Yeah.
We're producing a whole bunch of stuff here that is clearly doesn't have any business.
I showed it to them. I showed it to them, and they said, this clearly shows that the IT team is doing very well, and we're making very poor business decisions. And that was the end of the conversation.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah. Sorry, question? Yeah.
Whilst there's that computer tracker thing, there's nothing so pointless as doing the wrong thing really, really well.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
But that's what it shows.
It did, yes. And it's the same thing, even the one that I'm working on now, we went live after, now I strive to go live and get that pull from real users as early as possible. It's sometimes remarkably difficult. So this made me angry, and I think the way I brought it up and talked about it was a key contributor, and so that's where most of my time has been spent in the last 2 years, looking at communication models. I have no real time to talk about. So let me whiz through. Oh yes, so the limits of the Kanban method, dealing with humans. Okay, are we cool for another 10 minutes? Is that cool? Yeah, we'll do another 10. I love this because I don't think people think about how we are as humans. The logic of the Kanban method, it is the work in process limit that stimulates conversation about process problems. So that's that sort of, you can't do more than 7 things. The idea is if there was 8, you'd have a conversation. You have the option to break the limit, ignore the problem and carry on, or face up to the issue and discuss it and suggest a change. This works fine as long as it's not humans who may be embarrassed or threatened. If you've got humans, they do this. The working columns limit was 2. We had 3 items in it. I raised the limit to 3. There are now 4 items in it. This just happens to me all the time. So people are all for the truth, as long as the truth is not embarrassing or threatening. If it's embarrassing or threatening, they'll bypass, cover up, and pretend they're doing none of it. And I was at Agile on the beach in Cornwall last week. We had a product manager. The keynote said, product managers often publish roadmaps that they know are a load of shit. but they don't say so, and they don't say they're not saying so. And I'm thinking, I've been on the dev team that's had to promise, like deliver that heap of shit. And then I thought that was very astute of him, because I think that does happen. What I was puzzled about was his theory about how you change that was to get more people in the room and be more explicit. It doesn't play for me. That's an unsatisfactory solution. I don't think, if you believe me that we, and I include myself, act in these kind of ways defensively and don't say so, we need to have more than just to kind of get more people in there, be more explicit. Agreed. Well, I agree, and that's really important. So there are some changes, there are some ways you can act and some structures that you can bring in that reduce the threat if something goes wrong from all sorts of things. So the key thing, I love this story that Ken Schwaber, the inventor of Scrum, went to a client. Jeff Sutherland told me this story. They spent a day describing their 2-year plans, and at the end of the day they said, so Ken, should we do Scrum? And he's like, no way. He goes, there's just no way you're going to deliver this work. And even worse, if you do it incrementally, or iteratively rather, you'll prove within 2 weeks that there's no way you can deliver the 2 years, and that will be really threatening for everyone. And I love his advice, because see if you can spot the bypass and cover up. He said, get them to do waterfall and find a new job before the end of the 18 months. But so one of the things, the structural thing is if you release every fortnight and you don't do so well, you can recover from that. If you release once every 2 years and you don't do well, you're looking for a new job often. So structural things like making things small mean that the embarrassment and threat level comes down, absolutely. And you can model in your own behavior acceptance of stuff coming back. Like I do think it's interesting when bugs bounce back, but it's not like, it's not like we sort of cane them or anything. You're in the naughty step now, having a bug come back. And doing that is important. Here was an example where, this is my recent project, we predicted we'd do 280 points of work. After 3 sprints, even optimistically, we were only going to deliver 100. This was massively embarrassing and threatening. And I said to everyone, I think we should be transparent, consistent with Agile, and say so. And people said, no way. They're going to really fruitcake. And I'm like, I agree, right? They probably will be emotionally upset, because I'm upset, right? I don't enjoy this. But I don't know how we're going to get better if we don't say so. And especially if we don't say we're not saying so, because that's just plain deception, right? Straight up, that's deception. So what was interesting, though, was when people said they didn't want to, the question was, well, why? Because there might be some good reason. And people didn't want to appear incompetent. And I think that's important. People don't. Question?
I apologise if I'm confused here, but is that using the Kanban process there? So I thought you didn't use sprints with Kanban.
Good question. This is a client that I started with. I allowed them to choose. Well, they dictated. We were doing Scrum, and they were doing planning. And so we did have this predictive plan. This is what I think happens, though. You work. I wore a T-shirt psychically that said, our ambition outstrips our capability. And that was the point. This was our ambition. That was our capability. And people worried about being incompetent. But we said so. We said it to the client. And we came up with some suggestions about what we could do, like prioritizing more important stuff, doing less of it, doing it quicker, changing the order. And we told them, and they did get angry. And we tried to listen and empathize, and then we lost our cool a bit. Because they said do overtime, and we're like, we don't agree with that, and we're already doing it, and it's not helping. And then they said, it was really funny, they said it breaks our heart to hear this. This is really upsetting. And I said, well, this is upsetting for us too. But then looking back on it, they now say it's the best thing ever, and that's what all Agile projects are like. I've never seen this before in the wild, but it worked really well, and they tell everyone else in their organization, you should do Agile, because if you aren't going to make it, you find out early, and you can work to make it more productive. I'm going to skip this because we don't have time. I'm going to skip this too, and just a quick run through some strategies.
Quick clarifying question.
Yep.
So a lot of the charts you're looking at, you're still showing sprint numbers. So one of the things just probably worth clarifying that using Kanban is still that kind of sprint style cadence available.
Yes. I mean, I like this. I like the release every 2 weeks rule, and sometimes clients validly need to know what might we get done in the future. So it's important to say so. Some just quick tips, rattling through. One of the things, like making it safe for errors and to surface reasons why work doesn't go fast. I love this question. What wasted your time? We ask it every day at stand-up, at the end of the stand-up. What wasted your time? I don't care what you say. If you think it was waste, I want to know about it, and I want to know how many hours, just as an estimate, and a date. You can plot that, and then you can show people we waste consistently. On average, we waste 20 hours a week amongst a team of 10. And then really interestingly, you can start saying, why are we wasting our time? And you can look at things to do with the team, things to do with other teams, and it leads to good information to have discussions. Or in this case, I thought the developers, this is terrible, I'm going to admit this too, I thought the developers were moaning about the speed of their computers. And I thought, have I ever heard a developer say their computer's too fast? I thought, no, I haven't. So I'm just like, that problem seems really hard to solve in the investment bank. I don't want to know about it. And then it got mentioned 98 times in 3 months. And it led us to do, buy a better PC, do an experiment and run the build on that machine, use that data to show everyone it was 6 minutes, 2 minutes build versus 8, and the whole team got new machines. So asking people what wastes their time is very useful. You find stuff out that you can fix, and it does help stuff go faster. That was the forks. I put it in the wrong spot. That was me arguing with the development manager. This is the rate of new development finishing. This is the rate of testing. These are the sort of fortnights on the bottom. We used this to have a principled negotiation about, could the developers go and help test just for a little bit without running out of work? And the only straight thing they had in their office was forks. And so I used them to illustrate that we could probably afford a day because we had 2 weeks of time before we'd run out at current rates. I'll skip that. Making things discussable is very important, especially if people might feel embarrassed or threatened. One of the things we had in retrospectives was people spent too long talking in stand-ups. And so we instituted this 2-hand rule. If you think someone's gone off topic or it's going too long and it should move to the end of the stand-up, just quickly signal with a hand. And if 2 hands go up, it's a done deal. There's no debate. We just move that discussion off. So making it easy for people to say, because I've worked with other clients that are saying people just talk shit. And like that would cause threat, right? So 2 hands is a nicer way of doing that. One of the things is, as a manager, I found that I was doing too much. Like I was organizing, we have different people run the stand-up and do support on different days. I was organizing all that, and one of the things I've learned that's been really useful is just give people a structure and ask them to sort it out. So this is our holiday calendar of the next 2 weeks and following weeks, and people just put in when they're away, and then which day they're running the stand-up for the team. So just stop solving all the problems for the team. Give them a structure and ask them to solve it. Very useful. Yes, people don't ask questions. We think we do, we don't. The proof is to tape yourself, or even better, to ask someone to watch you in a meeting and write down all your questions. Brilliant. I did a retrospective with a group for 10 minutes on communication, and we taped it and transcribed it. There was only one question, and that was, can I interrupt? So it's really weird. People have this view that communication is just I talk at you, and when I stop, you talk. And it's weird. Ask more questions. These came from my daughter's primary school, and I love these. I just think if your work day could have these questions, it would be a better day. My wife reminded me that there were 5-year-olds, so none of the kids could read this. That's the only disappointing part of this story. Be explicit about your values. So starting retrospectives, I work with teams and sort of say, what are our rules about a good retrospective? And someone said, respond to a point before moving on to a new topic, have focus. And then the first thing he said was, I want to say 2 things, point A and point B. And they were unrelated. And so I was able then to sort of just check. I said, well, I heard A, and then I heard you move to a new point B. That didn't seem consistent with the rule that we set up. And he was like, yeah, that's true. So be explicit about your values, and then create an environment where you can test to see if people are inconsistent with them in a friendly way. This is the dots when things bounce back from various columns. We put the column name on them to see where the errors were coming from. We use this to prove that the manual tester, we'd replace what she was doing with automated tests, and we found nothing from the step that she was doing. We were then able to negotiate with the testing center of excellence. I love this. The testing center of excellence. All the other centers were not excellent. To sort of say we shouldn't actually have a manual tester. We should employ someone to write automated tests and get the BAs involved. And that was against investment bank policy, but we had the evidence and they let us do it. So gathered testable information. Final one, that it can be very useful. This is a private example. It can be very useful to gather data even when the topic is emotional. This is my little daughter, and we took her to Latitude Festival, which is near here. It rocks. I've been 5 years in a row. I love this area of the country for that music festival. My daughter wore the same shoes for too many days in muddy puddles and got athlete's foot, a bit icky. And so we got some spray from the chemist, and we sprayed her foot, and she screamed like she was going to die. And we were really tense, like, were we killing her with this spray or not? And so we decided to design an experiment. And this is what I'm trying to get you people, I'm suggesting do this at work, right? We did something where we said, well, let's get some more information to see what's really going on. How stingy is your foot out of 10, where 10 is you're going to die? And she said, it's a 10. And I said, well, let's use this stopwatch, because that hypnotizes children of a certain age. Let's use a stopwatch, and every minute we're going to check again, how stingy is it? And you can see this is literally a pain decay curve. But what I loved is because I was a bit worried we were killing her, but clearly if it went down half in a minute, it wasn't going to kill her. And then brilliantly, we kept doing this, and you can see that she got better at it. It was less painful, rather, each time. And we even did the scientific approach of predicting what it would be each time. So prediction, observation, testing experiments, gathering data to make decisions even in emotional situations is a very good strategy. I give you that from my own life. This is literally the final one. Sometimes measuring alone is not enough. We spent 6 months on a build system. We had one guy on a team of 8, 6 months full-time building an automated build and deployment system. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But the problem was the build kept breaking. And so I thought, well, let's just measure at stand-up, ask the question, was the build broken? And we had a tally chart here. And I realized after sort of 20 weeks that it was consistently broken about 6 out of 10 times. And I was really hoping that just measuring it would make the team think, why is it broken? Let's fix it. It shouldn't be broken. It didn't. And so then we did this graph here which shows the trend, which gave people more information and allowed us to have much more explicit conversations about it. Why is the build broken? Why do we think it's cool for the build to break? And there were several issues, and we've worked at them, and it has got better. But it just illustrated to me that measuring alone is not enough. You sometimes have to show people the trend and then ask them what's going on. We fixed that by tagging the builds with break reasons, and we saw here that it was a commonly recurring problem that we finally got to the bottom of. So thank you very much. That's the end of it. My hope is that you're sitting there thinking, what can I do with this on Monday? And some answers for you is to see if you can implement these kind of ideas. Stop starting, start finishing. Visualize things very simply, very quickly. You can do it yourself. You just need Post-it notes. You can even do it on a tool if you don't want to be visible. You can use Trello, which is a free tool, which is superb. I use it with a client overseas. We absolutely love it. Reduce the amount of stuff that you're doing in order to get things done faster. Look at what happens to the work. Look for cues and bottlenecks and debug them, if you like. Fix them. And then use metrics to collaborate with others and improve. So thank you very much. Sorry that I went long. I'm going to stay around. My trainer's at 9. I would love to talk to people if you found anything interesting. If you felt strongly against it even, that would be even more interesting. Come and challenge me. But thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that's going to be useful for you.